Heartless judge evicts black pregnant lady, regrets it when her lawyer shows up. The courtroom was unnervingly silent except for the soft murmurs of an anxious crowd. Jasmine Carter, a heavily pregnant black woman, stood trembling before the bench. Her hands clutched the rounded curve of her belly protectively, a stark symbol of her vulnerability. Across the room, Judge Harold McAllister glared down at her, his gavel poised for an authoritative strike. "Mrs. Carter," he bellowed, his voice cold as steel, "you've had ample time to vacate the premises. This court has no choice but to enforce the eviction." The room erupted into gasps and whispered protests, but Jasmine's voice cut through like a fragile thread. "Your Honor, please," she pleaded, her tone a mixture of desperation and quiet dignity. "I'm just asking for 2 more weeks. My baby is due any day now." The judge's eyes narrowed. "This is not a charity, Mrs. Carter," he snapped, slamming the gavel down. "Bailiff, ensure she's removed immediately." Just as the guard stepped forward, a commanding voice echoed from the courtroom doors. "Not so fast," it said, dripping with authority. Heads turned to see a sharply dressed lawyer striding in, a folder of damning evidence in her hand. "I believe we have a few things to discuss, Your Honor." Jasmine Carter's life had been a series of uphill battles, but she faced them all with unyielding determination. Born and raised in the heart of Atlanta, she'd grown up in a tight-knit community where neighbors looked out for one another. Her parents instilled in her a fierce sense of independence and pride, which had carried her through the toughest of times. But nothing could have prepared her for the storm she was currently weathering. 6 months ago, Jasmine's world was turned upside down when the factory where she worked abruptly shut down. As a single mother-to-be, she'd been saving every penny to prepare for her baby's arrival, but the sudden loss of income drained her resources. The eviction notice came swiftly, a harsh reminder that the world often showed no mercy to those already struggling. Jasmine had tried everything: selling personal belongings, applying for assistance programs, and even taking on odd jobs. But it wasn't enough to make ends meet. The apartment she called home wasn't luxurious by any means, but it was hers. The peeling paint and creaky floors told a story of resilience, a place where she had dreamed of raising her child. The landlord, however, was unsympathetic. He'd grown impatient with Jasmine's requests for extensions and quickly took the matter to court. It wasn't just about money. It was about principle, he'd claimed. But Jasmine knew better. It was about control and greed. Judge Harold McAllister was notorious in the community for his rigid adherence to the letter of the law, often at the expense of compassion. A man of privilege, he had little understanding of the struggles faced by people like Jasmine. To him, her story was just another case file, another example of personal irresponsibility. He'd made up his mind before she even stepped into the courtroom, ignoring the nuance of her situation. Despite the odds stacked against her, Jasmine had refused to give up. With the help of her best friend, Layla, she reached out to a pro bono legal organization that specialized in housing disputes. That's where she met Mia Richardson, a young but formidable attorney with a passion for fighting injustice. Mia had a reputation for taking on cases others deemed unwinnable and had made it her mission to ensure that Jasmine wouldn't be another statistic. "They think they can steamroll you because you're vulnerable," Mia had told Jasmine during their first meeting. "But they've underestimated who they're dealing with. You have rights, and I'll make sure the court knows it." On the day of the hearing, Jasmine felt a mixture of fear and hope. She knew the stakes were high. Losing the case meant losing her home, her stability, and the little security she'd managed to hold on to. As she walked into the courtroom, the weight of her unborn child felt heavier than ever. Every step was a reminder of why she was fighting so hard. Judge McAllister's curt demeanor during the proceedings made it clear he had little interest in hearing her side. He dismissed her pleas for more time, his words laced with condescension. Jasmine's voice quivered as she tried to explain her circumstances, but her heartfelt testimony seemed to fall on deaf ears. Meanwhile, the audience, a mix of reporters, community activists, and curious onlookers, watched intently. Some whispered in disbelief at the judge's harshness, while others shook their heads, resigned to the familiar sight of injustice in action. Jasmine's plight resonated with many, a stark example of the systemic barriers faced by marginalized communities. As the judge prepared to deliver his verdict, Jasmine's heart sank. The bailiff's imposing figure loomed nearby, ready to enforce the eviction order. But just when all seemed lost, the courtroom doors swung open. In walked Mia Richardson, exuding confidence and purpose. Her arrival was like a gust of fresh air, and the energy in the room shifted instantly. Mia's presence wasn't just a lifeline for Jasmine. It was a challenge to the entire system. Armed with evidence of the landlord's predatory practices and a thorough understanding of housing laws, Mia was ready to fight back. For the first time in weeks, Jasmine allowed herself to feel a glimmer of hope. The battle wasn't over yet, and she wasn't alone. Mia Richardson's entrance was nothing short of electrifying. The commanding click of her heels against the marble floor echoed through the courtroom as she made her way to the defense table. She gave Jasmine a reassuring nod before turning to Judge Harold McAllister, her sharp eyes meeting his unyielding glare. "Your Honor," Mia began, her voice calm but firm, "I would like to submit a motion to stay the eviction proceedings on the grounds of newly discovered evidence." She held up a folder, its contents brimming with documents and photographs. These materials expose not only the unethical practices of the plaintiff, but also serious violations of housing laws. The judge's brows knitted together in irritation. "Ms. Richardson, this is highly irregular. Why was this evidence not submitted before today?" "Because the plaintiff's actions only recently came to light," Mia countered. "I'd be happy to explain if Your Honor is willing to listen." A murmur rippled through the courtroom as McAllister hesitated. The audience could sense the tension mounting, a battle of wills between the stoic judge and the determined attorney. Finally, with a heavy sigh, McAllister relented. "Proceed," he said tersely. Mia stepped forward, her confidence unwavering. "This case isn't just about Mrs. Carter," she began, gesturing toward Jasmine. "It's about a pattern of exploitation and abuse by Mr. Donald Hartwell, the plaintiff." She placed a series of documents on the judge's bench. "Here are records showing that Mr. Hartwell has repeatedly ignored requests for basic maintenance, including fixing the heating system during the winter and addressing a mold infestation that's hazardous to tenants' health." The judge skimmed the documents, his expression hard to read. The landlord, a portly man in an ill-fitting suit, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His attorney, a smug-looking man with slicked-back hair, quickly stood to object. "Objection, Your Honor," the landlord's attorney barked. "This is irrelevant to the current proceedings." Mia didn't miss a beat. "It's entirely relevant. Not only do these violations demonstrate Mr. Hartwell's disregard for tenant welfare, but they also constitute grounds for withholding rent under state law." She turned to the audience, addressing the room as much as the judge. Mrs. Carter was well within her rights to demand a safe living environment for herself and her unborn child. Jasmine's eyes widened as she listened. She had always known her landlord's neglect was wrong, but she hadn't realized it could be used in her defense. The crowd began to stir, a mix of indignation and support filling the air. The judge raised a hand to quiet the room. "Let's keep this orderly. Ms. Richardson, do you have further evidence to support your claims?" Mia's lips curved into a faint smile. "I do, Your Honor." She turned back to the defense table and retrieved a stack of photographs. These images, taken by an independent inspector, show the current state of Mrs. Carter's apartment. The mold infestation is so severe that it's unfit for habitation. She handed the photos to the bailiff, who delivered them to the judge. As McAllister examined them, his expression darkened. The images were damning. Walls streaked with black mold, a leaking ceiling, and a broken radiator coated in rust. Even the most impartial observer would have found it difficult to justify the conditions Jasmine had endured. The landlord's attorney tried again. "Your Honor, these issues are exaggerated. My client has made several attempts to address tenant complaints." "Attempts that were insufficient," Mia interrupted, her voice slicing through his argument like a blade. "And I have testimony from other tenants who experienced similar neglect." She gestured to a group of people seated in the back of the courtroom. They stood one by one, nodding solemnly. The judge rubbed his temples, clearly frustrated. "This is quickly spiraling into a broader issue than this court anticipated," he muttered. "But I cannot ignore these allegations." The landlord, now visibly sweating, leaned over to whisper furiously to his attorney. Mia seized the moment to drive her point home. Your Honor, Mrs. Carter's eviction is not only unjust, it's illegal. I'm requesting an immediate stay of the eviction order and an investigation into Mr. Hartwell's practices. The courtroom erupted into chatter, the tension reaching a fever pitch. The judge banged his gavel, demanding order. Jasmine clutched her belly, a mixture of relief and anxiety washing over her. For the first time, she felt the scales of justice beginning to tip in her favor. But the battle was far from over. As the judge deliberated, the landlord's attorney launched into a venomous counterattack, accusing Jasmine of fabricating evidence and failing to meet her financial obligations. The insults stung, but Mia's unwavering defense shielded her from despair. Enough! The judge finally barked, silencing both sides. He looked at Jasmine, his expression softening slightly. Mrs. Carter, I will grant a temporary stay of eviction while these allegations are investigated. But I must warn you, this is not a permanent solution. Jasmine nodded, tears streaming down her face. Thank you, Your Honor, she whispered. Mia placed a reassuring hand on Jasmine's shoulder as they left the courtroom. The battle had been grueling, but it wasn't over yet. Outside, reporters swarmed them, eager for a statement. Mia stepped forward, her voice clear and resolute. This case isn't just about one woman's fight to keep her home, she declared. It's about holding those in power accountable and ensuring that no one is above the law. We'll continue to fight for justice, not just for Mrs. Carter, but for everyone who's been wronged. The crowd erupted into applause, their cheers a testament to the courage and resilience of one woman who refused to be silenced. Jasmine's story wasn't over, but for the first time in a long while, she felt hopeful. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for her unborn child and for a future where justice would prevail. The days following the courtroom hearing were a whirlwind of activity. Mia Richardson wasted no time in pursuing the investigation she had promised. Armed with a determination that matched her sharp legal mind, she filed an emergency injunction against Donald Hartwell and brought the landlord's shady practices under intense scrutiny. Meanwhile, Jasmine Carter found herself at the center of a growing movement for housing justice. Community activists rallied around her, determined to shed light on the systemic injustices she represented. Jasmine's temporary stay of eviction bought her some precious time, but the fight was far from over. Knowing that her situation could inspire change for others, she agreed to speak at local town hall meetings and community events, sharing her story and encouraging others to come forward with their own experiences. Her voice, though nervous at first, grew stronger with each telling. We're not just fighting for a roof over our heads, she said passionately during one event. We're fighting for dignity, for safety, and for the right to live without fear. Meanwhile, Mia uncovered a trove of damning evidence against Hartwell. Financial records revealed that he had diverted funds meant for building maintenance into personal ventures. Tenant testimonies painted a harrowing picture of neglect and intimidation. One tenant shared how Hartwell had threatened them with eviction after they complained about a broken elevator that left elderly residents stranded on upper floors. Another revealed that he had falsified safety inspection reports to avoid costly repairs. As Mia compiled her case, she also worked to ensure that Jasmine's immediate needs were met. With the help of local charities and housing organizations, Jasmine received assistance in securing temporary housing and prenatal care. Her apartment might have been uninhabitable, but her resolve to create a better life for her baby remained steadfast. Finally, the day of reckoning arrived. A new hearing was scheduled to review the evidence Mia had gathered. This time, the courtroom was packed not just with onlookers, but with supporters holding signs that read, "Justice for Jasmine" and "Stop Exploitative Landlords." The atmosphere was charged with anticipation. Judge McAllister, while still his usual stern self, seemed more attentive as the proceedings began. Mia's presentation was methodical and compelling. She laid out Hartwell's violations with precision, presenting receipts, photographs, and witness testimonies that left no room for doubt. Your Honor, Mia said in her closing argument, this case isn't just about one landlord or one tenant. It's about holding those in power accountable for their actions. Mr. Hartwell's greed and neglect have endangered lives, and he must face the consequences. But beyond this, We need systemic change to protect tenants like Mrs. Carter from ever being put in such a position again. Hartwell's attorney tried to mount a defense, but it was clear the tide had turned. The landlord's smug demeanor had evaporated, replaced by visible discomfort as his actions were laid bare before the court. The judge's stern gaze fixed on Hartwell as he spoke. "Mr. Hartwell," McAllister said, his voice heavy with gravity, "it is this court's finding that your actions constitute gross negligence and willful disregard for the welfare of your tenants. As such, the eviction order against Mrs. Carter is permanently vacated, and you are ordered to make immediate reparations to address the violations in your properties. Furthermore, I am recommending that this case be referred to the district attorney's office for further investigation." The gavel came down, and the courtroom erupted into cheers and applause. Jasmine's hands flew to her mouth, tears streaming down her face as relief washed over her. Mia turned to her with a triumphant smile, squeezing her shoulder. Outside the courthouse, a crowd had gathered to await the verdict. When news of the decision spread, cheers erupted. Jasmine stepped forward, flanked by Mia and a group of community leaders, to address the crowd. "This victory isn't just mine," she said, her voice strong and clear. "It belongs to all of us who faced injustice and refused to back down. Together, we can make sure no one has to fight this battle alone." The media's coverage of the case sparked a wave of reforms in the city's housing policies. Local officials proposed stricter regulations for landlords, increased funding for tenant advocacy groups, and a more robust inspection process to prevent neglect. Jasmine's story became a symbol of resilience and the power of collective action. In the weeks that followed, Jasmine's life began to stabilize. With the support of her community, she moved into a new apartment, one that was safe and welcoming. Her baby, a healthy girl she named Hope, was born shortly after, bringing a sense of renewal and joy to her life. Mia, too, found herself deeply affected by the case. The bond she had formed with Jasmine and the impact they'd made together inspired her to take on more cases involving housing justice. She became a vocal advocate for tenant rights, using her platform to push for meaningful change. As Jasmine held baby Hope in her arms, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The fight had been exhausting, but it had also shown her the strength she never knew she had. She vowed to teach her daughter the importance of standing up for what's right, no matter how daunting the odds. The story of Jasmine Carter and Mia Richardson became a rallying cry for change, a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming adversity, justice could prevail. And though the road ahead would undoubtedly have its challenges, Jasmine knew she was no longer walking it alone. Months had passed since Jasmine Carter's landmark case, but its impact continued to ripple through the community. The once overlooked issue of tenant rights had become a focal point for local activism, and Jasmine had emerged as an unlikely but inspiring leader. While she had never sought the spotlight, her courage and resilience resonated with people from all walks of life. In the days after the trial, Jasmine's life took a turn for the better. With the help of community organizations, she found a stable, safe apartment where she could raise her daughter, Hope. It wasn't luxurious, but it was hers, and it provided a haven for the two of them to rebuild their lives. Jasmine often found herself reflecting on how close she had come to losing everything and how the support of others had made all the difference. Baby Hope quickly became a beacon of joy, her laughter filling their small apartment with light. Jasmine's days were busy but fulfilling, balancing motherhood with her newfound role as a community advocate. She began attending city council meetings and joining tenant advocacy groups, determined to ensure that no one else would have to endure what she had. Her story became a testament to the power of perseverance and the importance of standing up for what's right, even in the face of daunting odds. Mia Richardson, too, had felt the profound effects of the case. The fight for Jasmine's justice had reignited her passion for law, reminding her why she had entered the field in the first place. Mia used the momentum from their victory to push for broader reforms, working tirelessly to address systemic issues in housing. Her efforts led to the creation of a citywide housing justice initiative, providing legal aid and resources to tenants in need. In a quiet moment over coffee, Jasmine and Mia often reflected on their journey together. "You know," Jasmine said one afternoon, rocking Hope gently in her arms, "it's strange to think about how one person's cruelty brought us here. but I'm grateful for the way it all turned out. I've learned so much about my strength." Mia smiled, her eyes soft with admiration. "And you've taught me that the law can't just be about rules and regulations. It has to be about people, about doing what's right." Their bond had grown into a friendship rooted in mutual respect and shared purpose. Together, they began hosting workshops to educate tenants about their rights, empowering others to advocate for themselves. Jasmine's story became a rallying cry, a reminder that change was possible when people came together. The city, too, had begun to change. New housing policies were enacted, ensuring stricter oversight of landlords and providing better protections for tenants. Hartwell's properties were placed under new management, and the landlord faced penalties that sent a clear message. Exploitation would no longer be tolerated. For Jasmine, the lessons she'd learned during her ordeal extended beyond the courtroom. She often thought about the people who had stood by her side. Mia, her neighbors, the activists who had refused to let her fight alone. Their support had taught her the value of community and the importance of lifting others. She made it a point to pay that kindness forward, volunteering at local shelters and mentoring young mothers who were navigating similar struggles. As she rocked Hope to sleep one evening, Jasmine whispered, "You're the reason I kept fighting. Everything I do is for you." Her daughter's peaceful expression reminded her of how far they had come and how much was still possible. The story of Jasmine Carter was not just about one woman's triumph over adversity. It was a reflection of the broader fight for justice, a testament to the power of solidarity and the belief that every voice matters. Her journey proved that even in the darkest moments, hope and determination could light the way forward. And as Jasmine looked out at the city she called home, she felt a profound sense of purpose. The battle for housing justice was far from over, but she knew she wasn't fighting it alone. With hope in her arms and a community at her back, she was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead.